Hey, hello. So today I want to talk about amplitude envelopes. It's something I discovered later on once I started messing with samplers and specifically the MPC. To find amplitude envelopes, you have to go to Program Edit in your MPC. This applies to MPC One, MPC Live, MPC X. Program Edit, Amplitude Envelopes. And then you're going to find different menus here. Master, Samples, and Envelopes. This is the one. For this tutorial demonstration, I'm going to start with something that I'm pretty sure you already tried before, which is sampling music. Check this out. You probably know which song this is, right? So I'm going to start, I want to show you what this does, but basically I'm going to give you 5 reasons why to use this section and how I use it normally. And I think you're going to find it useful because it's all about cleaning. It's all about keeping things kind of, tidy and making room for other sounds, making samples bounce. It's all about creating space and muting things that you don't want to present in the mix, basically. Be careful because in this section now with the recent update we have different envelopes. Well, we always had them, but now they're divided in different sections. So the first envelope, you're gonna see these little squares, is for amplitude. This is the one we're gonna practice today. The one for filters, envelope filter and envelope pitch. We're starting with amplitude, right? So the very first reason to use it, it's you have to think about cleaning samples. Basic stuff, right? Cleaning your samples. How can you clean them? For example, let me give you an example. This pad number 2. Can you hear the tail? Can you hear what happens at the very end of the sample? I have a reverb active, right? There's reverb in this program, but you can hear some sort of glitch. And this is something I mentioned before in one of my videos. Like when you're chopping in quarter notes or anything, but when you're chopping manually, you're trying to catch the groove of the song. Or even if you're dividing your chops and your sample in 16 different pads, and you want to play it like this. Especially with music from these eras, like in 60s, 70s, there's lots of groove. It's not perfect. It's not electronic music. You're not gonna catch those snares perfectly in time with your pads if you try to follow the groove, because it's not perfect groove. So this is normal, and it's very hard if you try to chop it and you go to program. This is what happens when you chop. You're always gonna get little artifacts in the end, right? For example, this one. Let's grab this one. Pad number 2. You see what happened here? But if you start moving things in cleaning in this section, you could mess the sample. The length of the sample is gonna change. You're gonna start getting like mute sounds, awkward choppiness. And this is the thing. I don't like my chops to sound like they're chops, just chops. No, I actually want this stuff to sound like it's natural. Like the music is blending, the groove is there. I actually want to add a little bit of my own groove to the already groovy sample. So what can we do? I talked about this before, but my recommendation is whenever you're chopping, just chop by feel. Have fun. If it's 16 perfect chops for a 4-bar sample, 4 bars sample, leave it like this. Just enjoy the chopping experience and don't really worry about being perfect. Why? Because we have amplitude envelopes. That's what happens next. You chop, you create your program, you go back to the main page and you start discovering those weird sounds, and maybe you want to leave this sample ringing with a delay, or you have a plan for this sound, but you don't like that glitching sound. Well, amplitude envelopes, you're gonna mess with the volume of things, and once you get there, remember, program edit, envelopes, amplitude, you have the attack, you have the delay, you have all these values. Check what's gonna happen with that glitch. The first thing I'm gonna do, is select just that pad. Make sure sometimes you can apply the same thing to all the pads, sometimes not. Sometimes whatever you apply to this pad is not good for the others. So that's up to you. If the glitch sound, it's like something that just happened to all the pads, like you go through the pads and you find the same problem, then it's good to select them all and do it in just one move. So here what I would do, decay, check this out, remember, amplitude envelope, decay, this value, oops, this is the value I'm increasing, and now we have this amazing visual reference, and it's gone. It's all you have to do. It's there, and now it's gone, and it's natural, and it doesn't really affect the pad too much, because the pad was fading out anyways. So this is the basic rule for amplitude envelopes, and I guess that's why it was designed this way, so you can clean those tails. So remember, cleaning tails, it's great, because the more you do this, the more you clean your music and the more you add quality to your production. Now let's get into the second use. Very important, especially if you chop drum sounds, if you chop quarter notes, and it's my favorite. You know it always works. If you one bar, but we actually chopping, or for me the main reference for this chopping style is the kick and the snare, and I try to find them when I'm chopping. The first thing I have, it's always this tail, this type of shape. You can see it, it's great. But what happens if that's not what you want? If you want to have your own drums, obviously there are other techniques. We can do sidechain and whatever. But what if you want to remove these drums totally? Because you want a section where you don't have any kick or any snare of your own. Like you just want the sample to be by itself, but you don't want the drums to be too present, too loud. That's when we mess with the other value of the amplitude envelope section, attack. It just removes. It doesn't remove it, but imagine it's a fader that's like being goes down and up, just exactly for maybe 40 milliseconds. I'm not sure if this is milliseconds, this value here, but for example, here I have it at 40. And remember, we can mess with this. This is a new option that we have. Imagine it's a fade. If we leave it in this shape, it's not gonna be as dramatic as if we do it like this, right? So you mess with this thing just for the shape of the fade, and we mess with attack till we remove that transient that we don't really want. This won't affect the sample. The sample is still the same. But thanks to the amplitude envelope, in this specific chop, we won't hear it. You can apply that rule to all the samples. That's something that if you're chopping drum sounds, you select them all. We'll have to do this again to apply the value. Okay. We mess with the attack value. And the drums are not as present as before. It's very effective. You have to be careful because once you start adding you don't want gaps, right? It has to be very subtle. You could also add like a little snare or something to fill in the space. For me, and for the way I produce, I want this to sound very natural and not like it's a sampler. I try to not to hide it, but I don't want it to sound too electronic. I just want it, I want this to sound like music, you know, once I start adding my own stuff. So it's a gap for you to fill in with something else. Now, third use, and this is very common. You're gonna find it all, like it happens all the time. You find in your sample packs sounds, drum sounds, especially drum sounds, but it could also be if you're sampling something, specific type of drum sound, percussive sound that comes with reverb, like room. Like you hear, and my example is this one. Checks out. Ignore the lo-fi. I'm gonna remove the lo-fi thing because it's distracting. That was my effect from MPC Air's lo-fi. Very good one. This is it. Okay. I don't have any reverb on this program, so this reverb sound, like you can hear the room, right? It's a big room sound, reverb tail, and it sounds very nice. But the problem is that sometimes these sounds don't really go with what we're trying to achieve in this particular track. Like we have a track with a specific room sound, and then you have this thing that sounds like it's happening somewhere else, like in the jungle, you know. Like we have this studio like drum kit that sounds like, wow, it's recorded in an amazing studio, and all of a sudden this sound doesn't have anything to do, like if the listener, sometimes it can be a creative thing, right? But if the listener is just immersed in the experience of, oh, this drum sound, you know, it's a real drummer, and all of a sudden you play this type of stuff, what's going on? Oh yeah, it's a sample. Oh, it's a DJ making music, you know. I don't like that. So when unless it's very intentional, what I try to do with sounds like this is just to remove these tails. Not 100%, not totally. Like sometimes that room sound, it's not as bad, but this one, can you hear it? It's like, it's big, it's bouncing. And if we check the sample, look for how long it's ringing. For how long, it's just, you know, all these low frequencies bouncing in the stereo. I want to keep it clean, and I want to give it my own tail, my own reverb. So amplitude envelope, very, very useful here. Depends on what type of tail you have, but the first thing I would try, if you try to use decay like this, it's gonna be a bit abrupt, you know? It sounds like I just turned down the volume, but I was late. I didn't do it well. My decay here is at 91, and it's still not, I'm not very happy with this. I'm not satisfied. So we recently got this shape. If you see these two buttons, let's say start and end, right? Right now it's at end, you know, but now we can set it as start. You know, the decay starts way from the beginning. Like it's gonna be decaying from the very first moment you hit the pad. You see, different shapes. And now, if you start playing with decay shape is different. And this was the right way to tone down that room sound, to cut it from the beginning so it's less apparent, that we less evident that we just grab the fader and oh no, too much. No, this is the right way to do it. You can also play with this circle in the middle. That's gonna help you reshape it. It depends on how subtle you want to be and what type of tail you have. But if I do this, check this out, 1 and 71, it's gone. The room sound is gone. I'm just keeping the basic sound that and then I can add my own reverb. Then I can go to the program, use my sense, that I explained that in one of my previous videos. I add my own reverb, more subtle, less present. There you go. I have a sound that belongs to the same physical space in my mix. Okay, for use, and this one is a bit more fun because now we can get creative with this. It's not just about solving problems or cleaning stuff, cleaning mess. You can also create space strategically for your song to sound nicer. It's like, especially with samples like this one. It's a song, it's not a sample. It's the entire song there, like all the frequencies, maybe except the bass, because I'm filtering low frequencies, but it's the song. So obviously you have few options with this type of samples. In this particular beat that I'm building, that's my stuff. I want to blend my stuff with the sample. But the sample, remember, it's like it's a piece of music with its own instruments, like the bass, drums, keyboards. The vocals come later. You know the song, right? It's Michael Jackson's. So it's full. It's already full. It's impossible that you just pretend, oh, okay, I'm gonna use this sample, especially a section that's already like. Remember, it's mastered. So this little space for you to. You can use lots of sidechain with drums. Everybody's doing it. It's fine. But if you want to do more, this is going to come handy. This is going to work for you. So check this out. Amplitude envelope. There's nothing going on. Nothing really destructive. I haven't touched anything. But if you go to LFOs, you can actually mess with the amplitude in a way, in a different way. The LFO can actually control that envelope, the amplitude envelope. So one thing that I like doing, and it's a good demonstration, is try to find a shape that you consider cool, or try with many different ones. Make sure first you already set up the BPM of your song here, because these LFOs, you have two options for LFOs. LFOs can do whatever they want at a set rate, and the rate is in hertz, 2 hertz here. You have to set this up any way you want, but most of times this is not accurate and it's not consistent. If you're working on something electronic or kind of, consistent type of beat, and you want the LFO to do something cyclical, don't play with this. We're gonna set sync down here. Ignore this value. You can leave it as whatever you want, but you can go to sync, and the basic one that always works is quarter note, especially when you chop quarter notes. Just try it out as your very first experiment. Quarter note. For the waveform, the basic ones are always the sine wave, triangle. But if you have a sample that's full, I don't think I would mess yet with the S and H. Or square. Square is gonna make things very loud and muted at all. Like you see, it's like very, very aggressive. Let's go for saw. The regular saw wave. You see the shape? It goes up actually in cycles. And we're gonna apply the quarter note sync mode here. So remember, saw, quarter note, and then we have destinations. So you're gonna send this LFO to the amplitude envelope with this value here. And you're gonna play with the pads. So if you hear it, if we actually try to play a beat here, check this out. Let's check what happened. This is basically a sidechain. It's been dug down by the LFO. So the LFO is making that space for you. It can be more dramatic. I had it at 50 before. Now let's go dramatic. The LFO is doing it. And of course, it's it's a straight line. So you cannot shape it the way we shape LFOs here in envelopes. Remember that if we wanted to do it, we could probably do something like this, but with a different shape, you know, and once we play the pads, it works that way. But if you don't want to touch this section and just set the LFO quarter notes, it's like a quick sidechain setup. There's some clicks there. It's not perfect, but if you set up your drums and you play them properly, or you set a compressor, there are many ways to fix that, but that's quarter notes, right? What happens if we use 8 notes? Bop, 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 bop. You can hear it, like the duck. It's making space. It's making space for you to fill in with your own instruments and notes. Once you mix that, check this out. Once you mix that, let me remove this, with your own stuff, it could give you interesting results. That's 8 notes. I don't like it as much. What about quarter notes? The regular sidechain setup. Of course, it needs more work, but that's the point, to make space for you to fill in with more stuff that you create on your MPC, or, you know, have space for more samples, different vocals. That's one of the concepts for LFOs and amplitude envelopes. Okay, so this is my last tip for now. With the same sample, remember, it's a full song. No sidechain. I have a limiter on the master track, but it's not doing much. And okay, the amplitude envelope is intact. You can see here velocity modulation. What this does is basically, closing the dynamic range. So if full level is not active here, the softest touch won't be as soft as if I have it like this. It's reducing the range so I can play not just in full level, but in softer velocity notes and stuff. But anyways, this is not relevant. Don't worry about this. I'm gonna be doing full level. This last shape of the amplitude envelope is for situations where you want to bring dynamics back, and that's something that this thing does very well. When we master music, or when we sampling, specifically mastering, when we sampling master music, when we do that, sometimes the dynamic range of those samples is like almost nothing. Like some songs could look like sausages, you know, like there's no space, there's no silence. Some of the song depends on what you're sampling. This one is quite loud. I think my limiter is pushing down the bass sometimes. You see, the bass comes later. But it's full. It's like there's so much going on. Let's say I want to bring it back to a state just previous to adding a limiter. Like, you know, when you add limiters, most of the times what you can see the limiter doing is catching the drums and bass. That's what my limiter does most of the times. Like, just making sure drums, bass, and, you know, these big transients that sometimes escape their compressors, all of them are adjusted to a set volume, right? That's what happens with mixes previous to mastering. For me, in this situation, it's like I want to bring it back to a, you know, I don't want that much loudness, but I want the drums to be loud. Okay, we can do that. We're gonna change it from AV to AHDS here. It's a different shape of envelope. Boom. And now we have more values to adjust. So I recommend if you click here next to amplitude envelope, you can kind of zoom in and see everything as it is. So it's a good way to do it. Use the touchscreen. It's very useful in these situations. So now you have sustain. The additional thing that you have is sustain. I'm using all the pads here. They're all selected. So whatever I do here affects all the pads. Boom. Check this out. It's so evident that we got the drum sound and we got a little bit of tail, the original sample, right? Like all the other instruments, like the thing is violins and trumpets and horns, sax, you know, wind instruments, they're all there. You're gonna catch different things depending on what you do here, but obviously you're gonna hear specifically the drum sound is gonna be louder, way louder. What I'll do is bring the sustain back. It's gonna go up. The drums are loud again. I don't know why, but the original sample, the drums, look, sustain back up, all the way up. I don't know, but the drums, I cannot hear them. It's like they're very thin. And of course, this is a song from back in the 80s. Different mixing and mastering style. So, I want to hear the drums louder. So how? With the sustain. And of course, we have hold here. It's a new value that you didn't have in the previous mode. That one's gonna extend the drum transient. Just make sure you don't extend it for too long, because otherwise this has to be intentional. If you know there's a drum sound there, a drum transient, we'll try to catch it with hold and then decay for like smoothly, you know, tone down the volume and get a nice tail. Think about what transient I want and what tail I want. It's all this is the trick with amplitude envelopes. What type of transient I want and what tail I want. Do I want the tail to be louder than the transient? You know, the start transient. Do I have a drum sound there? Do I want the drum sound in my you know, in my program? Here I feel like I'm getting some sort of like pre-mastered version of the song. It's not too bad, but here, because of that, you know, we reduce the loudness. This is all this loudness that we kind of removing here. Well, now we have it. We have that space, you know, available for maybe other instruments. Of course, it's not all about the amplitude. We also have to play with EQs, filters. but I'll leave that for a next video, because these tricks can also be applied and horizontally, for making guitars fit in, or the bass, or I have a previous video called removing kicks from samples, where I use a combination of these concepts. But definitely, like, this is one of my favorite sections in samplers. It's very genius, and if used if you're strategic with the way you use it, you can actually remove sounds or add sounds, or focus on specific things without having to rely on, I don't know, crazy software that does that for you. You can even be more on point than software because you're doing it manually. So I really love it. It's one of my favorite sections, and discoveries. I didn't really talk about this with anyone. I had to mess around and play with these things. It was great. It was great, and I'm pretty sure there are more things we can do with it. I just haven't discovered them so far, or found them on YouTube. But yeah, let's keep on sharing. I'll see you in the next video. Enjoy your weekend, and we stay in touch. Cheers.